Another episode of the Real Life Game Changers. This is where we are scouring the world looking for the people who have changed the game in their industry. And do we have somebody who has done that for you on this episode? Absolutely. Look, what it comes down to in business is separating yourself from the rest. Yeah, so in this episode, we're going to be learning how to see around corners in your business. Yeah, I'm really excited to ask about that. So this lady, this super lady that we got on the episode today, is an author, is a speaker in demand. So we are fortunate to be able to have her presence here, and I really want to delve into her expertise in helping businesses grow, helping businesses scale with strategic vision, and some other amazing subjects that we're going to be discussing. So, Rita, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mark.
Yeah, well, great to have you here. So, give us the highlight reel of like what was Rita like growing up, and what got you to the point to say, yeah, this is like what you're now doing today.
My parents were immigrants from Germany. They were both scientists. And they first moved to New Haven in Connecticut. That's where I was born. And then we moved the family to Rochester, New York, which is the home of Xerox and then Kodak, when I was young. And that's basically where I grew up. And I got very interested in history, very interested in business, and came to the New York City area to go to university, and got really interested in history. And my dad said he couldn't think of anything less attractive from an employment point of view than becoming a historian. So I ended up majoring in political science and going into government work, actually, after getting my master's. And what I was doing there was the early versions of what you could think of as digital transformation. We called it computerization back then. And that got me really interested in large scale organizational change. And so when I decided to do a PhD, that's what I was intrigued by. And I found myself at the Entrepreneurship Center at the Wharton School, which is in Philadelphia. And my supervisor said he couldn't think of anything more boring than my topic, which was the science of implementation. And then, as luck would have it, we got a big grant from Citigroup at the time to do a study which would extend over 3 years of their internal corporate venturing programs. And that got me interested in corporate ventures and innovation. And then that's pretty much what laid the groundwork for the work that followed.
Beautiful. So, like anybody watching right now, put hashtag live if you're watching it live. If you're watching this or listening to it on a replay, put hashtag replay if the platform you're watching on allows you to do so. And I'm going to recommend you hit the share button because we're going to be picking another winner as we normally do for some goodies. We've got some wonderful things to give away. So to be in for a chance for that, share it on your timeline. Let us know when you've done it so we can give you a shout out, and tag at least 20 people. Tag at least 20 people, and then we'll be picking a winner by the end of the show. So yeah, Rita, so just give us some examples of like, like businesses. What is? Let's start with the problems. Like, what are the things that people are doing that are really slowing their businesses down? Let's give people some things to avoid.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as a business scales, it's very difficult to keep bureaucracy from finding its way in. And so, one of the things to be really careful about is how do you get that balance right between creating guardrails, which are useful for the business, and actually making them toll booths, right? So, a typical thing that'll happen is something goes wrong, right? And then we figure out why it went wrong, and then we put in place all these processes to make sure that that thing will never go wrong again. Well, as that accumulates over time, what you end up building up is this just bureaucracy to the point where nobody can make any decisions. And that will really slow you down.
Mm. What are some tips around, because you just reminded me, and a lot of our people watching, they're in business, in property investing, they're managing projects. So you got like multiple construction contractors, solicitors, brokers, all of these people involved. Like, what is something that people can do to, because it's not what people are saying, because if people are saying it, at least there's a conversation being had. How do
Mm-hmm.
people manage what's not being said? Like all of these things talking behind and maybe not people not pulling in the right direction. What can people do about that?
Well, I think one of the most interesting resources for, especially for people that are in that mega project consultant construction sort of space, is the work of a gentleman by the name of Bent Flyberg. He wrote a great book, which I've got right here, How Big Things Get Done. And what he talks about is the thought process that you want to bring into these projects, which is thinking very slowly and really understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish before you take action. And what often happens is people will take an action, they'll leap into something and then realize halfway through that, they're missing some critical step or the ecosystem isn't ripe yet. And there they are now spending money with an idea that really needed to be thought through more carefully. So the concept is really think slowly, but then act quickly.
Nice. That is a good one, especially in property investing. Like if, we teach people, we don't make decisions on feelings. We make decisions based on the formula, because one day I'm feeling great and I take action on something I shouldn't. The next day I'm not feeling so good and I don't take action when I should have took action. So I like that. I think slowly but act fast. So, like, where have been some businesses like? I mean, what type of business are you always working with? Large businesses? Have you ever worked with small businesses? Is it a mixture?
Oh, it's a mixture, absolutely. So I work with tiny little businesses as well as some quite large ones. And then, there's an interesting blend when you've got tiny little teams that are part of a larger corporation. That's always very interesting as well.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that people need to watch out for? Let's say you're going from a small business and you want to break through into being like a larger business, so they can get past the million mark and get on their way to the 10 million. Because in my experience, going from 0 to 1 million is one set of rules. Going from 1 million to 10 million, it's a different set of rules. So what are some things that people can look out for, or maybe start to put into practice now so they can get ready for scaling?
Yeah, well, there's a great blog on this by Ben Horowitz, and what he talks about is giving ground grudgingly. What that means is you're going from being an individual team that's moving very quickly to being a much larger entity that, by definition, has to move more slowly. But it's really making sure you put into place the operational, organizational, and technological platform that your future growth is going to rest on. And what I would observe is a lot of entrepreneurs get so intrigued by going after something that's phenomenal, that they go for it, right, without realizing there's all this stuff behind the scenes that has to be in place. So inventory controls and the right user security and the right ability of the sales force to meet with demand. Sometimes one of the worst things that can happen is incredible success, because if it catches you unawares, that can cause big problems.
Yeah. So, just reminding me, one of my mentors, I was asking him, how did he make decisions? Because, he built a business and he sold it for 100 million. It was the largest, company of its type in this country. And I just said, hey, listen, like, how do you know, how do you project the cash flow or the income based on how many people I can go and hire, because it's a risk. And he said, Mark, we never knew. Like, we just hired and we just made it work. And at the time I'm thinking, okay, I get you, but like, how do I actually go and implement that? Like, what tips or what strategy should people have in place when it comes to wanting to invest in more people, because it's the right time, the brand's picking up, the client base is, you're ready to explode, but obviously now manpower is becoming the question.
Well, the rule of thumb with growth companies is you want to be hiring just a little bit ahead of need, so that you have time to bring the people on, to onboard them, to make sure that they understand your culture, how you want to present the company to customers, and so forth. So there's a need to think a little bit farther out than your current cash flows may actually support. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, for entrepreneurs. The other thing, though, is you can also think about ways of spacing out some of that demand. So if you look at what Elon Musk did, right, with his auto companies, he would get orders in before committing to actually delivering cars. And so he could adjust the production volumes based on what he thought his factories could tolerate. And then customers they went into it eyes wide open, understanding you don't have a firm delivery date. You have a commitment that we will deliver, but it's going to be sometime in the next 9 months, not exactly then. So you can work on both the supply side and the demand side to bring the two into alignment.
So you're talking about like getting the cash flow, getting the sales coming in because people are committing to get in
Mhm.
queue for such a product, but like then delivery is going to come down the line.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting. How would somebody do that if their brand is not like what Elon Musk has done? What would be a
Well,
way around?
in the beginning, his brand was not that well known. I mean, he had money from his exit of his early tech company that he set up, and then he was, of course, part of the very popular PayPal mafia. But he wasn't that well known early on. What I think, he's very charismatic. He got the word out, and I think what you have to think about is what's your public face to the world. And today, it is so much easier than it ever was to get a viral message out. And another company that did that really well was Dollar Shave Club. And you may remember they launched with this hilarious video that their founder made, who had been a former improv actor, and it secured them 25,000 orders day one when they opened their doors. And so you don't have to invest in a lot of the traditional media to get the word out.
Wow. So is there such a thing? Because I remember like we've grown two software companies really quickly. We've grown a training company really quickly. We've grown a property investment company really quickly. And I always remember when I was in the corporate world, people saying, "Oh yeah, you can grow too fast." Is that really a thing that you can grow too fast?
Sure. Sure. I mean, if you grow, as I said, without putting in place the right infrastructure, you can grow very quickly and then flame out because, you run out of money. I mean, Steve Blank is fond of saying, startups run out of money if they don't demonstrate product market fit pretty early. Corporate ventures tend not to have that pressure, so they go on for a lot longer before somebody says, "Oh, this thing isn't working." But if you looked at Webvan, would be a classic one from the last .com boom. That they raised all this capital on the illusion of grocery delivery at home at that time. And at the time, the ecosystem just wasn't right? And of course, now we have Instacart and all these other companies making money, kind of filling that last mile gap. But you can grow too fast for sure.
But is that only coming down like is that only like a detriment if something's not a fit? Like what if the market is a fit, the client base is ready? Um, like what other things should we be looking out for? Or is there a way to scale fast and make sure everything stays on
Yeah,
track?
well, I mean, to me, there's a couple of examples that are current that do this. So one is a company here in the US called CareBridge, which has used technology to deliver services to the most medically compromised people that our government health services serves. So these are people who are being cared for at home. And the dilemma is it's very complex, right? So you've got physicians, but you've also got home aides, you've got home care workers, you've got pharmacists, you've got nurses, there's a whole array of people. And using this very specially designed software and technology, CareBridge is able to make all that work at a really granular level. And so they've grown something like 160,000% in the last 2 years since they opened their doors by being able to fill this desperately deep need. So that would be an example of a company that's doing this well. How do they scale? They scale in a way that you might think of as fractal, right? So I've got a care set up in one. We call them zip codes. You might call them postal codes. But then I don't extend that same care setup. I duplicate it. So you can think of it almost like a string of beads or a string of pearls. And so you set up the complete care solution and then you duplicate it, duplicate it, duplicate it. So that's a way of scaling without falling victim to these like heavy overarching systems. Another thing that Amazon does, which I think is very helpful, is they have what they call the equivalent of application programming interfaces between their teams. So, if you and I are working together and we've got some kind of dependency in traditional management, you have to have a meeting and discuss, how are we going to work this out? What's going to go first? What's not? But if you have something like an API, and I'll give an example that they use at Salesforce. So at Salesforce, they have what they call the V2 MOM system, which stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and metrics. And every single person in the company has one. and they post it to an internal company webpage. So if you and I are working together, we can look at each other's V2 moms, and we can see if this thing that we want to accomplish together will fit with both of ours. And if it doesn't, then we have to meet. But if it's a good fit, we can just work together without actually having to work together. So those are some ways you can scale without all the burdens of coordination and cooperation.
Wow, that is super interesting. We're just embarking on a project right now, and it's like the tagline is to create the ultimate environment to work, rest, and play. So it consists of like office space, workspace, but then there'll be the gyms, normal gym memberships, spas, restaurants. We even got a charity where we train kids that we want to be able to host at each one of the sites as well, so people can bring their kids and they can learn about money and entrepreneurship. And we've been doing all this already for about the last 4 years. So the idea actually came from us doing these transformational events, and like people saying, oh, it's the end, it's the end. And one day I just thought, why does it have to be the end? Why does it have to be just every so often we do this? Why can't this be daily life? And that's where the idea came from. Now we want to scale, we want to build this and go global with it in due course. And obviously most people are familiar with the McDonald's story, especially since the film came out, that really he just scaled the ability to go and acquire real estate and franchise the system. So now so it was the system that kind of set them apart from everyone else to create the fast food, in 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. And you just explained, and obviously we all know how, Amazon is scaling and they're all now going all over the world as well. Is it the system? Is the difference the system, and if it's a repeatable thing that can just be almost picked up, go to another place and go, boom, this system as well. Is that the key to being able to scale fast and keep it on track? Or are there some other?
Well, it's one way. It's one way. And so there's, that franchise model, which is what you're talking about. What that does is it allows you to bring in capital, because your franchisees will bring in capital into the system. And so that can allow you to scale much more quickly. Now, they need to believe that absent your investments at headquarters or absent your brand building at headquarters, that their asset would be less valuable. So you have to really have a very powerful brand and then a very powerful brand story to be a successful franchisee. Now, there are other models. For example, when Samsung or Intel will want to set up a chip fabrication facility, that's a different kind of scaling, right? That's a copy exactly, do and replicate precisely what was done in the original installation, right? And so that's a different way of scaling. So there are different routes you can take.
So when you come into a business, like what questions would you be asking? So I'm just wondering if people can know what questions they can be asking themselves. How do they take a stock check of where they're at, and decide, well, okay, so these are some of the things I've got to start to implement. These are some of the things I've got to stop doing then. What's the normal kind of MOT kind of check, so, to get people going in the right direction?
Well, usually when they bring me in, they've got some kind of concern about strategy or innovation at some level. So what we find is that, if you think about the traditional view of strategy, it comes to us from industrial economics, and industrial economics makes these two assumptions. One is that there is such a thing as an industry, and the second is that the normal state of things is equilibrium, the things not changing. And so one of the first things that I try to understand when I come into a company is how they're creating alignment between four things that need to be lined up. So the first thing is, what is your strategy, right? And when strategy is done right, it's pulling you into the future. It's articulating a point of view about where we can use our resources to create the greatest impact and outcome. Second question is, okay, how are you managing your budget process? And how's that getting connected to strategy? Because what we find is very often people fall into this habit of budgets getting trapped. The budget just increments year over year when the strategy could actually flex hugely year to year. The third process is the process by which you govern your innovation programs. So what projects get the green light, which ones don't? What are you doing? What should you stop doing? And what I find is with most organizations of any size, you pick the lid up off a corporate portfolio and it's a mess in there. I mean, it's just there's somebody's pet bunny from 3 CEOs ago, and nobody said, why are we still doing this? And then the last process that doesn't get connected is, how do people believe they're going to get ahead and be rewarded? And this is where innovation often comes right up against the core part of the business's operations, because many people feel that they'll be rewarded for taking activities that have a benefit in the near term, and not for something that might bear fruit 5 or 6 or even farther out in time. And so it's a real tension that you see in companies. So I usually ask a series of questions around those processes. How do you do that? And very quickly you'll get to the heart of some of the essential issues they're grappling with.
Good. And obviously you have insight to many different businesses, which gives you a big advantage when you go into new businesses. And I heard that, in fact, Amazon have this strategy where if it has a success chance of even only 10%, they still go for it. And I heard some story, I don't know how true it is, that Amazon Prime was just one of those things that only had that, and obviously that has blew up and gone into many different areas now as well. So what things do you like, what would you call them, like the secret weapon that every business that you go into, you're like, this is kind of my out the box thing that I want to get them to look at, because I know it gives them quick wins, or it's going to get them to be able to produce some great gains here. Like, do you have like one or two or a few different of these things that you're always ready to pull out when you go into these businesses?
Sure. Well, the first is this portfolio mapping, right? Which is saying, and the way I think about it is, you've got some things you're investing in that are going to produce results today, and you've got other things you're investing in because they're options for the future. And I mean that incredibly literally, right? It's a small investment you're making today that buys you the right, but not the obligation, to make a bigger investment. So to take an example, if I was working for a remote, distance hosting company, I'd be asking the question, what comes after Zoom? And I don't know, you don't know, but we have some hypotheses, perhaps, right? It could be holography, it could be virtual screens, it could be a virtual reality headset, it could be many things. And our job is not to try to predict which of those things when we're dealing with options. Our job is to place small bets, so that as we get more information, we can make decisions farther on. So that mapping out what's actually in your portfolio is often where I'll start with the governance conversation, because many companies don't even know what they've got. They don't even know what they're working on. So that's one tool that I definitely use. And we've got some software that also allows you to do this pretty easily, which is a lot of fun. Second thing that I often ask people is whether they are clear on what good looks like. And what you'll find is many senior leadership teams, even in quite large companies, have not had that difficult conversation about 3 to 5 years from now, what does good look like? How could we say, yes, we've accomplished what we're setting out to, if you have no idea what you're trying to accomplish? So that's a second area where there's usually an awful lot of confusion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think many companies, my experience in my journey is like, you get told some story on the interview, maybe it's talked about for a week while you started, but then after that, it's never talked about ever again. And it's never rehearsed, it's never recited, and without that, there's no chance to evolve it, because
Exactly.
you're not talking about anything. So how can you evolve anything? You know, in our businesses, we actually use a method where we're talking about the mission and the goals and the outcomes, even as much as 20 years down the line. And since we've been doing this, we've been doing it many years now, I found that it brings everybody together. And number one, no matter what department they're in, everybody knows what we're doing, why we're doing it, from the high level, like who we serve, what we bring and what impact do we bring to the world. And I just believe it then gives the day-to-day more meaning, because we all know whatever we're all doing leads to the bigger vision and the bigger picture. Yeah, so we think that's really important. Have what businesses, or what kind of importance do you feel that businesses are putting on real assets with inside there? I mean, obviously our business and our background, our current strategy is all about real estate, empowering communities through real estate, whether it be small, family rentals, right up to building, huge projects. Like, are businesses using real estate to help grow their businesses, or do you think some of them are missing a trick?
Um, Well, the answer is as varied as anybody who uses real estate, right? I think the answer is really to start with the customer. Where is the customer resource coming from, and what do you need to offer in terms of real estate that goes with it? So obviously, it's a very different strategy if you're a high-end, high-street retailer than if you're simply an e-commerce player sending stuff out of a warehouse somewhere. So it's going to be a function of what you're doing that differentiates you in the eye of your customer. That, I think, makes the biggest difference.
But do you see like leadership teams building into their strategic vision? Yes, we want to own the land, we want to own the property, or are they very much like just leasing places from people like us who build the thing in the first place?
It varies by what their strategy is. So if you look at, I'll use Elon Musk's Tesla again as an example. Unlike many of the automotive majors, Tesla has decided they want the entire production facility to be vertically integrated. So if you think about an automotive major, they've got a policy where they'll have dozens, hundreds, thousands of suppliers, each of whom contribute one specialty part or piece to this whole that's being built. Whereas Tesla does it all internally, using their own internal parts, their own internal robots, their own internal everything. And the wisdom of that was shown when, you remember post-pandemic, we had this huge problem of chip shortages right, left, and center. And the automotive majors literally had to shut down their production lines because they couldn't get the computer chips that operated the parts of the cars. Musk's companies just said, well, let's get a hold of whatever chips we can, and then we'll reprogram our software to work with those chips. And so it put them in a really different position than a lot of the automotive majors. So I think that's the kind of thing that comes first, right? Before you focus on the real estate as an issue, it's, well, what's our strategy? And then the real estate follows from that.
Good. Okay. So what is this learning to see around the corners in your business? That sounds interesting to me. I don't know what comes to mind before you go into it yourself. And anybody watching, what does that mean to you, learning to see around the corners? Because to me, it's like predicting the future, being ahead of the game. That's what it insinuates to me. Is that really what it is, or what's your thought process behind that phrase?
It's being prepared for possible futures. And that's really what seeing around corners is all about, because the future is very unpredictable. I mean, if you'd ask somebody in 2019 to lay out what the next 3 years would be like in the world, very few people would have been able to precisely say. Now, there was a lot of early warnings. So the first thing I think people need to understand is that when you're thinking about the future, there are always 3 kinds of indicators you can use. So the first kind are lagging indicators. It's great information, but it's about stuff that's already happened. So as an example, Jeff Bezos was interviewed once about his success at Amazon, and someone had congratulated Amazon on having a great quarter. And he responded to the interviewer, well, thank you, graciously, right? But he said, in my head, I'm thinking, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The quarter we just had was put into place by decisions we were making 3, 4, even 5 years earlier. And so it's a kind of a dumb thing. So that's lagging indicators. And most of what we work with in business, even today, are lagging indicators. It's great information about stuff that's already happened. Then you have current indicators, which tell you what's going on right now. And that's things like your net promoter scores and how deeply penetrated you are into your customers' budget. And what's going on right now, employee engagement, right? The hardest thing to get a hold of are these leading indicators. They're giving you information about what might happen. And the goal is not to predict. The goal is to prepare yourself. So a great example of this would be back in the 90s, a bunch of computer scientists all over the world realized that to save on what was then expensive digital storage space, systems all over the world had been programmed with 4 digits with only 2 digits rather for the year. And so computers thought the world began in 1900 and that it was going to, end in 1999, and come the year 2000, it was going to reset to be 1900 again. And you may remember, or some of your listeners may remember the chaos, the consternation at the time. I mean, it was bad, right? Banks would be unable to close statements. Nuclear plants were going to become unstable. We should all move to Montana and stockpile wheat, right? Well, when the big moment happened, what happened? Nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? Groups of people in their tens of thousands said, whoa, this is a really, really bad thing, and we should mobilize. And so they did. They stopped what was then called the Y2K bug, and they prevented it from being the disaster that it could have been. And so, even today, right, because nothing happened, you'll still hear people say that they thought it was overblown. They thought the risk was overdone, and so forth. Now, we never know the counterfactual case. What if we'd done nothing and just let it roll out? We don't know how bad it could have been, but a lot of very smart people said it could be really bad. And so if you want to get people to take action on a leading indicator, my research suggests there's a couple of things that are necessary. So the first one has to be clear, right? There has to be a clear kind of reason that this is important. And so Y2K was very clear, right? That was a logical explanation that an ordinary person could understand. So it's got to be clear, has to be something ordinary people can understand. It mobilizes action if there's a villain, if there's a clear thing that we should all do, if there's a bad actor to be stopped, or a regulation to be dealt with, or a rule. And people have to be able to see the connection between addressing that issue and the outcome they're trying to drive. So another great example of this would be the hole in the ozone layer. You may remember a few years ago, there was this discussion that the ozone layer, which protects all of us, from the more harmful rays of the sun, had been breached. It was developing these holes. And so that was the first thing, a very clear communication, that visually, right, that makes it very clear. People can visualize that. But the second thing that was interesting was they found a villain. There were these chlorofluorocarbons, which were used in air conditioners, a bunch of other things. And the whole world said, we've got a problem, we've got a villain. Now what we're going to do is put into place agreements to reduce the CFCs that were allowed to escape into the environment. And here we are, sure enough, people are now talking about, the hole in the ozone layer is healing, right? So you want those early warnings, you want those leading indicators, but it's not about predicting, it's about being ready.
So what can people do? Like, I mean, obviously one of the biggest markets, especially for people building wealth, is real estate. But like, okay, real estate is one thing. Like, what can people? Because you've used some indicators there, but not everybody's going to be, aware of that until later down the line. So, like, what can we be doing, or what questions do we have to ask ourselves? Let's say if real estate's an example, like, how do we see around corners when it comes to this market?
Sure. Well, I think what you want to do is take a couple of different uncertainties, right? So one dimension certainly that's affecting everybody's thought process about real estate now is, what are offices and communal spaces going to be? What are they going to be used for? And so one dimension of that might be kind of a continuation of previous uses, where you've got a central business district, and then you've got satellite offices and people are commuting. But certainly another set of considerations would be, well, actually, no, people's commute time and time in offices fundamentally shifting. So those would be two uncertainties. And then I would juxtapose them against two others. One, which might be something having to do with environmental regulations. So environmental regulations suddenly becoming much more strict in terms of how much heat, for example, a given patch of real estate is allowed to generate. So much more stricter ESG regime, or something that's similar to what you've got. So your sort of linear projection, which is, office use is going to kind of stay the same, and we're not going to have too much interference with our business from ESG. That's one, and that's the linear projection that you might make. But if you take the three other cases, they're all really different futures. And what that allows you to now do is say, okay, well, in a case where, let's say, work habits are wildly disrupted, and we're getting a huge amount of pressure on the ESG front, what does that future look like, right? And what that probably looks like, as I reflect on it, is a lot more attention to specific kinds of real estate. So some people have talked about, you'll be building Nothing, you raised it, these sort of contained communities that are 15-minute cities where people can live and work and exercise and educate their children and do everything in this much more circular way without these sort of long commuting patterns and so forth. But that's only one scenario. There are others.
Yeah, brilliant. We can see a few people get involved in that discussion there. So, like, what are some of the biggest things that you've either discussed or been a part of or helped people turn around? Like, I'm talking like who was heading for total disaster, and like what was it that enabled it to turn around, not just save the thing, but like blow it up and then turn it a losing streak into a winning one.
Yeah, well, probably one of the best known ones I did some work with Brookstone. Brookstone, the funky retailer that does stuff in airport shops and so forth. And they had gotten themselves way down on sort of just selling stuff that people weren't excited by anymore, and they were competing very much head to head with the I don't know if you remember back, but the airlines used to produce these little catalogs of kind of basically the same sort of stuff that Brookstone sells. So massage chairs and little, fancy ice cream scoops and technology that sort of does weird things for hobbyists. But we were able to turn that around. We were able to find a way that Brookstone could become more relevant to more consumers, got their real estate strategy sorted out so that we had really good shops in places like airports where people might wander in and they'd say, oh, I could use a headphone for my long flight, or I could use something that you might sell at a voltage adapters, stuff like that, where there's sort of smart little things that didn't require, a mortgage size purchase, but which you might pick up and take with you take with you. And so that was an example of one that worked really well.
Who would you say is the most important players and like that you need on the team? And is it just about the players? Is it just about a CFO? Is it just about a marketing genius or someone who can do branding? Is it someone who can build sales teams, or are there other things to it? What would you say is the biggest?
Yeah, well, the way I'm looking at it in my current research is looking at something I call the permissionless corporation, which is, if you go back to our earlier conversation about dependencies. So imagine a team that had the freedom to suggest what a customer might want or might be appreciative of. And then on that team, you either give them access or put on the team people with all the skills they need. So engineering, finance, marketing, whatever, and they operate as a team. So a great story of this is from GE Appliances, which is a very kind of permissionless structure. Small teams are allowed to pursue ideas, with small budgets, not big budgets, but they're allowed to pursue ideas and test hypotheses without senior leaders having to weigh in. So here's a great example. Among the things they make at GE Appliances are refrigerators and air conditioners and coolers and stuff like that. And one of their people noticed that in the recreational vehicle market, so these are the RVs, the homes that move, on you, so you can go camping, but it kind of creates an indoor space. And they happened to notice that the RV market use a tremendous amount of GE's output in their facilities. And somebody there said, well, hang on, why don't we go into an experiment where we would custom design an RV, but because we know so much about appliances and how they work and everything, we can design one that's super comfortable, that is super energy efficient, that is perhaps friendly to renewable energy, and we can make it all kind of seamlessly designed right from the beginning. Now, if you had said to General Electric, and by the way, they're owned by Haier, which is a Chinese company, which is very famous for having these kind of micro enterprises that do things, and what they said, if they'd asked for permission, right? Somebody in a traditional company would have said, what are you talking about? We're an appliance company. We're not in the RV business. But because they saw that intersection, right, between what a customer might want and what their capabilities were, they could actually experiment with that. And so that's an experiment that's underway right now.
Nice. So basically what you're saying is the killer strategy is finding out what people need and like giving it to them, right?
Yeah, and so the way that I think about that is there's a concept which Tony Ulwick developed and which Clayton Christensen used to talk about called the job to be done. And if you think about it, nobody buys anything ever because they want to. The only reason I'm buying anything is because I'm hiring it, in effect, to get a job done in my life. So if you take, I'll use people probably, like you, right? You got 4 kids, right? Did you say that? So think about it. Over the last 3 years, right, the whole wedding business has been through, very, very steep trough, right, with the pandemic. And now that it's coming back, we're seeing wedding after wedding after wedding. Well, if you're selling anything to someone between the ages of about 22 and maybe 40, like it or not, you're competing with weddings. So if you're in the family vacation, home setup, home moving, in any of those fields, your budget is competing with the wedding budget. And so I think you really want to understand what's the job people are trying to get done, because it's not necessarily people who are just like you in your same categories competing. It's people from entirely other different categories.
So would you say that, like, what's your take on like people and businesses? Like, are businesses really trying to help people have more freedom in their life, do you think? Because obviously work takes up a lot of one's life traditionally. But
Mhm.
these days, people learning about investments and this whole era of online hustling, entrepreneurship, side hustles, all of this. I mean, listen, some of it works and some people do make it work, but then others don't, because they're obviously missing the strategy. They thought it was going to be some get rich quick type of thing.
Mhm.
But like, do you see, or what is it that our businesses are doing to say, yeah, like, you have your time with your family and the time to pursue things that you might love, but also still deliver results with the organization? Is that happening, or you say that that's still out of balance?
Well, I think it's happening in fits and starts, and it's unevenly distributed. Science fiction writer William Gibson very famously once said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. So if you imagine us going from this sort of factory model of employment where people are just basically bad substitutes for robots. They're just poorly functioning robots. And if the way the employer is thinking about the employees, I take this piece and I put it from there, and it's a totally routine job. Between the robots and AI, a lot of that's going to get automated because it doesn't require a human being in many cases. Where I think employers are starting to see and appreciate the benefit that humanity brings is in the more creative parts of jobs. And there are some employers who really get that. They say, hey, we want you to bring your whole self to work. We want you to use your creativity. And, the Kevin Nolan, who's the chief executive officer of GE Appliances, said, he had been rising at General Electric in that business for many years. And he said, I went into one of these maker spaces in Louisville, Kentucky, where they're based. And he said, what I found was, a bunch of my own engineers were there at 9:30 at night making things because they felt the energy and the passion and the delight of being able to create something really new. He said, and then those same guys come into work the next day and they're watching the clock to see when they can finally leave, because we're not letting them express their creativity. We're not benefiting from their great thoughts. And so he ended up sort of using that mindset to completely change the way that they do things at GE Appliance. And so at GE Appliances, they have this makerspace, which allows a team to go from a concept all the way through to something that can be sold in the market. And unlike many other innovators and accelerators who don't do that, they actually create a go-to-market. And it's only when they get above about 1,000 units sold that parent GE will now take it in and scale it within the parent company. So I think that's such an interesting model.
Wow, that is beautiful. So, like, what are people doing to do this? Like, what are you seeing? And how maybe a different question is, if people are going to, if organizations are going to start to give this freedom,
Mhm.
and allow that, what are some things that can be in place to stop people, like taking advantage of it, let's say?
Sure. Well, so another couple of great books about this are Reed Hastings and my dear colleague wrote a great book called No Rules Rule. And the subtitle is Creating a Culture of Performance and Accountability. So here's what I think is happening in a lot of places. Like, we've gotten the freedom part, right? What we've left out is the accountability part. And the companies that are getting this right, I see, is they really look at leading indicators, and they really look at those embedded in their metrics. So this isn't just somebody's opinion, or I think this is right or wrong. This is an actual predictor of subsequent behavior, which you can look at, and it allows the teams to self-manage. So you need to have the accountability built in, as well as the freedom. And that's where I think a lot of firms are just not, they haven't figured it out yet. So they're still operating in a sort of a halfway command and control. So if something goes wrong, the leaders all, dump on it like a they all jump on it and go right back to their traditional command and control, where what you have to do with these newer systems is you have to allow them to kind of mature at their own rate. So companies that are doing this really well would be Spotify is really known for this, Amazon, Netflix, I would say, is operating in that way, where you've got, so the way that work is done is different. So instead of this classic kind of waterfall where, step one happens and step two, they break it down so that it's done in parallel. They also make it modular so that I can learn, right? And they do things that are more, they allow the parts to be more independent of each other because they've built these interfaces. So there's a whole new way of working that I think is drawing on the fact that technology today can replace a lot of what managers used to do.
And I've been in situations before where, like, almost a circumstance forced an opportunity, like let's say somebody leaves, yeah, and before that everybody thought that this person was doing X, Y, and Z, and oh my god, if this person leaves it'd be a disaster, whatever. But then this person leaves for whatever reason, yeah, and then it opens up to say, well, actually now let's have a look at what this person was doing, because we need to have other people take care of it. And then people have stepped up and the company is now massively benefited, yeah. Number one, like, I want to know what's your opinion about that, but also number two, like, what can we do about not waiting for that situation and just with the current people step up the accountability?
Well, one of the things that you'll find with organizations is we all develop what the scientists call a competence trap, right? So you have version one, let's say, of a system or a technology, and let's say it's Microsoft Excel, something like that, a spreadsheet, and you embed that. But what makes it valuable is you then create idiosyncratic practices around that spreadsheet. So you have the generic spreadsheet, but then when I bring it into my company, let's say it's a real estate company, now I've got all these specially designed systems and programs for telling me what pricing should be, and predicting, how much I should be willing to extend myself in terms of credit, and maybe looking at how likely are my tenants to be to pay what I need to pay. Anyway, in other words, you build all this stuff around this spreadsheet. So now somebody comes along with another technology and says, oh, this new thing is going to be 100 times better than the old thing. But now to move to that higher performance vector, you've now got to give up all of the capability that was built on the back of that older system. So if you think about something like QWERTY keyboards, right? Why are we still typing on QWERTY keyboards? It's because as a species, right, at least those of us in the English-speaking world, we've built up an incredible competency at touch typing and navigating. I mean, even now, devices like our phones, which honestly don't require QWERTY keyboards at all, they're set up that way because we're so used to looking at things that way. And I have heard scientists say, if we all got rid of our QWERTY keyboards tomorrow and switched to these other ways of interacting with digital devices, it would massively improve our productivity. But it does require that investment, right? That giving up and that investment in between. And to this day, we're not willing to do it. So to me, that's an example of how a company can get trapped. And if you use your specific case of here's the outperformer, right? Given yesterday's technology, they're doing really well. But it isn't until they go away that somebody else takes a fresh look and says, hang on, maybe there's a better way of doing this, and discovers yes, and then that can indeed boost your productivity even further.
I mean, sometimes even just thinking about it, like, which thing do we go to first? Which thing do we want to improve first? I very much need, what's the best word? Some people in my team, they need to handle me, let's call it that. Yeah, because I'm like, yeah, let's change everything. Let's, do everything different all the time. And it's like, well, we ain't even got used to doing it how we decided to do it a moment ago. Like, how do you, like, what's some indicators, or what are some processes that you could use to continue to always want to innovate, be ahead of the game, strive, have this creativity, but also not just be chasing every shiny penny?
Yeah, well, you're visionaries, and it expects that you sound like one. Your visionary people are going to have an idea a minute, and so you need some way of figuring out which ones are more on track strategically and not. And that's where this whole question of posing things as hypotheses instead of declarative statements becomes really powerful. So, I have a hypothesis that if I handed somebody a cash register with a QR code for a discount on my next purchase, that 45% of people would actually do something with that. And then maybe of those 45, 20% of them would actually become future customers. In other words, you're laying it out as a series of hypotheses. You're not just saying we should do this, we should do that. You're saying, here's what I think will happen. And now you have the basis for comparing it to what actually does happen. And that can help guide you in terms of what decisions to make going forward.
Nice. And one last question before we start wrapping it up, because I got a few other questions to wrap it up. But last question on this about the business, like, what have you seen is some of the best either strategies or principles or what you've implemented to have the whole company buy into like either the vision or leadership or basically get everybody on the same page?
Well, it starts to me with leadership behavior. And setting your agenda. And I mean that incredibly literally. So when I go work with a company, one of the first things I often say is, hey, send me the last 3 or 4 meeting agendas that you had when your senior leadership got together to discuss important stuff. And, I'll go through it and I'll say, let's say innovation, they say is important to them, or something else strategically, internationalization, whatever it is. And I'll go through that agenda and I will literally look at what are they paying attention to. And what you find a lot of times, especially if it's innovation or something like that, it's item number, 18, right next to material safety data sheet update. Well, you're not paying attention as a senior leader. And the most important thing you can do is leverage your attention to get the organization aligned around your strategic goals. Because if you're not paying attention, nobody else is going to. And you can't sort of say, I really believe in innovation, and then you spend your entire week focusing on this quarter's results. So I think the first most significant lever that you have at your disposal is what's on your agenda. And by agenda, I'm talking item 1, 2, or 3, right? Now that matters because you have to make a choice. If you put an innovation as number 1, 2, or 3, it is something else. Maybe it's operational efficiency can't be 1, 2, or 3, right? And that has to be consistent, and you have to live it, and that has to be how you spend your time. And that's how you get people to really believe that you mean it.
Nice. I love it. I've already started to come up with more ideas already. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but we'll see how that pans out. So thank you. I've got a couple of questions I always ask every guest I have on the show. And but before I do that, I just want to say what an amazing insight. I mean, I can already tell we could speak for hours about all of these things, and I can like feel the cogs turning of all these different scenarios that you've been in previously. So you built up obviously some great skills. And where can people find you if they want to know more or follow what it is you're doing?
Sure. So my website is ritamcgrath.com, which is pretty straightforward. And my sister company, which is really about what I think your listeners are interested in, which is how do I actually make this happen in my company? It's called Valize, VALIZE.com. And that's where you'll find information about some software we've developed, our learning guides, how you could work with me and my team one-on-one. If you wanted to do that, that's a great resource for you. It's called Valize.com.
Beautiful, thank you. So, what if there's people? So here's one of my last questions. What if there's people out there that have had an idea, want to start a business, or maybe they've been running a business for a long time, but they've kind of just been hovering around a certain size or revenue or impact is what I like to measure. What would your advice be to these people that just haven't continued to grow, haven't made the next step, or haven't started if they're not started yet? What would your advice be to them with all your now experience?
Yeah, well, I think you need to develop a hypothesis around growth. So, what's your market hypothesis around how many people, what's the nature of the problem you're solving or the job you're doing for people? How prevalent is that job? How widespread is the population that needs that job done? And that can then get you onto a track for really understanding much more where the growth opportunities are. And it sometimes is not a big thing. Sometimes it's a small thing. I mean, if I think about back in the day, one of the big drivers for Amazon's growth as an e-tailer was the one click to order. Right. I mean, today we think of that as utterly ordinary, but back then it was a big deal. You know, if you bought from Amazon and you had a history with them, you hit one click. If you bought from anybody else, you had to fill out your credit card information and go through all that registration process. And it gave Amazon, you know, a big leap forward, even in the face of competition selling very similar products and services.
Yeah, that is funny. We call that the buy by accident strategy. You know, like you say, a lot of other websites, you click buy now, and there's still lots of steps to do. You go to Amazon, you click buy now, you literally buy now.
Right.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, we love it. Okay, thank you. So last question before I let you go. I ask all my guests this, and that is, in our community, we have a saying that says that you got to do the right thing for the right reason. That's how you make decisions. Yeah, so you got to do the right thing for the right reason. Now, why is that?
Well, that's really the essence of effectiveness as a leader, isn't it? You know, understanding and being clear about what is the impact you want to have in the world, and then, you know, getting the timing right, you know, in service of that. And there are plenty of people who are very confused about their purpose, and there are plenty of people who see it so clearly they rush into it before the rest of the world is ready. And either one of those is not great.
I love it. You're so right. There is either that or the other. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you everybody for listening. And yeah, in our community, we do say you got to do the right thing for the right reason, because that's the only way that you discover your true potential. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Rita. We'll see everyone next time.